So, I'm here to talk about the New Mutants. Um, as you can probably guess, I liked it. Um, I'm one of the few, apparently. I'm seeing these reviews all over my Google uh, pages, Google News or whatever, saying, the worst X-Men movie ever. And, a lot of hyperbolic melodrama. They're trying to kind of consign this to the oblivion that was the fate of, movies like X-Men The Last Stand and Hulk by Ang Lee and, um, yeah. But I don't, well, first of all, I don't think it's bad to be in that company. I think The Last Stand is a far better film than it's often given credit for. And Hulk, I think, is way better than it's ever given credit for. Um, I think Kim Newman was the only critic on Earth who liked Hulk when it first came out. Um, but anyway, uh, yeah, this is Blue Review, so I'm on episode 27, I guess. And I finally got my New Mutants copy. And the Blu-ray looks beautiful. It's got a lot of extras that are very illuminating, and it's got your typical 4K remastered, glorious picture. Photography by Peter Deming, who shot movies like Evil Dead 2 and Lost Highway, and nominated for some awards for Lynch's Mulholland Drive. Might have won some awards for that. Then a number of other mainstream and kind of middle mainstream kind of films, From Hell and a bunch that I can't really remember. But he does some great work here. It's really beautiful to look at. So, this film has a lot of talent involved in it. So, what did I think of it, and what's the deal? What's the movie? What? Why? Where? When? And how? Um, well, The New Mutants was a comic book that I read. I didn't read it when it first started. I was reading X-Men, and I was pretty faithful to X-Men, even though I had some issues with Chris Claremont's writing here and there, no doubt. I can't remember who the artist was at that time. I think that period was Dave Cockrum and then I believe Paul Smith. And I was a little, not sure which direction I was going to go, but I was a collector. I was going to keep at it every month, hell or high water. And I was a Marvelite. Even though I was already starting to, I'd already become very passionate about DC, or was becoming passionate about DC, I should say, because that was around the time I started collecting All-Star Squadron by Roy Thomas, and reading New Teen Titans by Marv Wolfman. And so, I saw DC was, really blowing up, the quality, but I'm still mainly Marvel obsessed. I had a friend named Derek who was reading a lot of black and white indie comics and a lot of indie superhero books, companies like First Comics and Pacific Comics, uh, companies that are no longer with us anymore, unfortunately. Um, that was a cool time, the mid 80s. And this was, probably right before the big explosion with Dark Knight and Watchmen. I'm trying to kind of place it, roughly. I may have my chronology slightly askew, but I think I've got it for the most part. Frank Miller's Ronin was a big deal, and things were changing in comics. I wonder sometimes if Claremont didn't create the New Mutants with one eye towards being part of that sea change, because his X-Men to me had become very cliche. very septic, very, I don't know, trendy, cutesy in a lot of ways, pretentious in some ways. This was around the period, I guess, that Rogue joined the team for the first time, and after being a villain, and I don't know, the book kind of went back and forth. Sienkiewicz did a couple of issues that had Dracula in it, and I believe, according to an anecdote on this Blu-ray, The Mutants, Sienkiewicz was then asked to do New Mutants, and he was like, this is their flagship title. I don't want to, sink the ship like he can ruin X-Men. I mean, come on. So they started talking, and he agreed to do like a 3-part story, the Demon Bear saga, which apparently is not apparently, it is a chunk of the basis for this film. He said after that he was having such a good time he stayed. I had to go back and get the Demon Bear issues. I started collecting. Well, I had started collecting New Mutants within its first year because it had a massive crossover with Team America, which was a kind of a cheesy comic book, but the last issue of it, with Ghost Rider and with art by the late David Simons, really struck my fancy. And the character of the Black Marauder, the biker, really made an impression on me. And I thought, wow, okay, there's some potential here. And then it's canceled. So then they pop up in New Mutants, and it gets really exciting. We find out that they're all mutants, and rather than the Black Marauder being one of them, a la Mockingbird in DC's Secret Six, instead, it was one of them, but it was all of them were subconsciously projecting their minds and abilities into that one person at a time. It would go from one to the other because they inhabited one of the New Mutants briefly and became the Black Marauder, and that's how they kind of got, they're mutants and they can project this entity onto other mutants. So to this day, I don't think they really, realized their potential, but that's true of numerous characters in Marvel. But anyway, that was a fun story, and crossed over. The Viper and the Silver Samurai popped up, and then I missed a few issues. And when I started buying it, it was being drawn by Sienkiewicz, penciled and inked, and there was a 2-parter with Cloak and Dagger. And the story was incredible. I thought it was some of Claremont's best work. I thought Sienkiewicz's very realistic portraitures of the characters mixed with his real frenetic impressionism really brought a dynamism. And Claremont could kind of break out. He didn't have to depend so much on florid description and redundancies. He could kind of get right into the dialogue and dig in where he excelled, but which he was very uneven at. He wasn't a very disciplined writer as far as. I mean, he was no Alan Moore, but he wasn't even a Roy Thomas. To me, he was not an auteur with a voice. Though many, many, many millions of people probably disagree with me. He did have a voice, but it was kind of trite. He didn't mean it to be trite. He would have probably been better served doing scripts for soap operas or episodic television. Comics, I don't know. I think if you're going to depend that much on the verbiage, and the verbiage is tries too hard to do things that it can't do on its own, you're losing something. You're losing a communication. If you're going to write something that lean, it needs to be precise. It needs to be tight. It needs to be communicate strongly. like Miller's writing, for instance. Frank Miller's writing was a great example. He could be very terse, almost like Hemingway, but his 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 visuals I mean, his visuals through words alone were very vivid, and then coupled with his artwork, it was incredible. Claremont wanted to overwrite, but it was Sienkiewicz that pulled back a lot. So I enjoyed their run. I bought the back issues that I'd missed. I still have every issue that Sienkiewicz did with them, which was around maybe 15 issues or something like that. Um, from the late teens to the early to mid 30s of the comic, number wise. Um, I loved it. And I loved the characters. And I thought the characters, I think New Mutants is Chris Claremont's masterpiece. I mean, later it got lost in a sea of crossovers with Secret Wars 2 and with X-Men, where Magneto comes and takes over the school, but the book itself, as originally devised, was, the X-Men were off on their own thing, and Xavier was teaching these new students. So Xavier was, it was a book largely about him, more about him than X-Men had been. So, and it fed into and out of X-Men, the continuity, since Claremont wrote both. So that's always helpful, like when Steve Gerber wrote, Daredevil and Man-Thing and the Son of Satan and Defenders all around the same time. He could kind of feed them into each other and create his own little sub-universe. So Claremont really had a big, uh, a nice, what's the way to put it? He had a lot of nice toys to play with that were at his disposal. And then they were, he was able to more or less do his own thing for a while. Shooter, didn't micromanage him like he had in the past with the Phoenix fiasco. And if you don't know what that is, then, well, anyway, I'm talking about the behind the scenes fiasco, not just the Dark Phoenix storyline, but what went on behind it. But that's a story for another time and not to be told by me necessarily. Though I do have one anecdote about it, but we won't get into that right now. I didn't like the movie, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. So I loved the New Mutants, and of course, 30 years on, no one would think there's going to be a movie. But then again, since there were successful X-Men films, I guess it seemed inevitable, and it was announced, and the casting seemed pretty astute, and it seemed to have a small cast. And then the teaser trailer came out, and it looked to be a horror-oriented film, a darker film. By this time, the X franchise had really changed a lot. The mainline X-Men films under the name X-Men, to me, were just devolving into just utter crap, and with each movie, it was just like more and more painful to watch. And they became more and more mainstream and commercial. And in a way, that was faithful to that era of Claremont. I mean, I hate to say that. In a way, it was. But like I said, I wasn't fond of that era. So, I'm not going to enjoy movies that are trying to ape it. But even people who weren't into the comics didn't really care for those movies, though they seem to make enough money. I mean, the only one that truly was a critical flop and a commercial underperformer was Dark Phoenix, though it still made a good bit of money. But it was the last one. And that's probably why it made a good bit of money, because people wanted to see the last installment. Because, of course, by this time, we're hearing that Disney's buying Fox, and that ultimately is going to merge the Fox heroes under their aegis with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which I don't particularly think is a great idea. We'll see. The Fantastic Four could work, possibly. I'm skeptical as hell. X-Men, I think, deserves its own universe, though, to get its themes across in a cool way. I thought Claremont's best work on the X-Men was when he was just concentrating on the idea of these mutants and these misfits, these outcasts. And when he was, when they were all on these grand adventures in outer space, and Daring Do, and Nightcrawler with a sword, and I don't know. I mean, to me it was cheesy. Even at that age, even at that younger age, I thought this really isn't for me. This is. I grew up on Steve Gerber and Steve Englehart and Don McGregor. I mean, this stuff is kind of, I don't know, corny. But it sold tons and tons and tons of comic books, and most of my friends were obsessed with it. And I kind of followed suit, being a Marvelite, like I said. So there is a point I'm getting to, albeit it might take an hour, hopefully not, is that the New Mutants was a departure, the comic book. And as it was a departure and really focused in on a different aspect of the mythos, so too does the film do the same. The film captures the comic book, to me, just about perfectly. There really aren't any misfires. I mean, all the characters are accurate to the comic books. There are a couple of casting issues that came up with two of the characters that are Hispanic that were darker skinned in the comic books. Yeah, I think it would have been better if at least one of them had been darker skinned. That would have been a lot more, given some balance to things. I mean, it's an international cast of international characters, but the racial makeup is not real balanced. Even though even though the main character, more or less, main character is Native American, but I don't know if the actress Blue Hunt, who plays Danielle Moonstar, I don't know if she is actually Native American or not. I'm not sure about that. I need to do some research. The guy who plays her father, Adam Beach, is though. So I thought they would try to go with a more darker Roberto da Costa character. He's Brazilian, but they still had a Hispanic actor, but he was pretty white. So but he was well written and pretty well performed. The rest of the cast was perfect, spot on, and Alice Braga as Dr. Cecilia Reyes was such a different character from the comic book, with a few similarities, but and it didn't really matter, I guess, that they changed her so much. And Alice Braga, I mean, I think she was in that Queen of the South TV series where she's like a female drug kingpin. I mean, it's pretty gritty, but I mean, she is absolutely an authentic Hispanic actress. I mean, she English is not her forte. I mean, she's fine at it, but it's not her first language, and it's obviously not a language that she inhabits. She doesn't seem to be truly bilingual, which is fine, because look at all of us who are, monolingual and can't learn Spanish. So why not? Why can't Spanish people have the same issue? It's America. No, everybody's got to speak English, right? So, just kidding, but I don't believe that. So the cast and the characters. Well, they picked the main archetypal characters out of the comic book. Charles Xavier is not a character. There is an allusion to him and to other parts of the mythos, and we'll get into that in a little bit later. But for the most part, it's isolated. Basically, there's like a hospital, which it seems almost like an abandoned mental hospital. It would have been cool if they'd filmed that there. I mean, I know of people who filmed horror movies in such places, and horror movies set in such places, and this is evocative of a horror film. But that's what's cool about it, is it doesn't fit in any one genre. It's a superhero movie by default. It's with the mutant angle. It's a science fiction. The mystic and supernatural elements make it horror. It has some action, but it's not an action film by any means. And a lot of it's a drama and a coming of age story with some humor sprinkled in throughout. and it's a bit more, I don't want to say gritty, but it's a bit more adult, even though it's teenagers they're depicting. It's a bit more adult than the majority of the PG-13 X-Men movies, maybe than any of the PG-13 X-Men movies, because it is PG-13. But it has more cursing, more sexual innuendo, and more blood and gore than any of the PG-13 X-Men films. Now, I'm not counting, of course, the R X-Men films. I mean, Deadpool 1 and 2 and Logan are just jam-packed with all of those things. Well, not as much the sex in Logan, but, still, there's plenty of adult material in those three films. And to me, this film exists in that kind of limbo, if you'll pardon the pun, between the dying X-Men franchise and the branching out, the last creative bursts, which were in the offshoots, the spin-offs, like which Deadpool 2, Logan, and the television series Legion, which is extremely high quality and somewhat adult, and definitely very surreal and Lynchian and psychedelic. And that's what, about David, who's uh, Charles Xavier's illegitimate son. There was another TV series called Gifted in the same general universe, because they're obviously alternate universes, because the timeline got royally fucked in Days of Future Past. So everything diverged. There's several possibilities of what the future was beyond, to the 2000s, from the 2010s to 2020s. There were several possible futures, and we've seen a few of them. This one follows one of them. This one is on the same timeline as Logan, which was fascinating. I had no idea that this was like a prequel to Logan, but it is, because there's, a huge twist. Spoilers. Xavier is not the benefactor of Dr. Reyes, as we and the characters believe, but the benefactor is actually the Essex Corporation, and we see some footage from Logan that's like found footage, shot on a telephone or something, of training sessions going on, at this Essex place, and they're training these young mutants to be really destructive, to harness their destructive power, to be killers, and that's what we saw in Logan, the last generation. Well, I guess maybe the last generation of mutants, but also the mutants that were cloned. They were like test tube mutants, like X-23. So it's hard to say when that footage takes place, the footage that's used in both Logan and New Mutants. I mean, in Logan, it seems to be from the last few years up to the movie. So, when X-23 is probably born and is a child growing up in this place, and leading up to 2029 when Logan takes place. But if that footage is contemporary with New Mutants, as we are given a strong indication that it is, no 100% ironclad confirmation, except that, yes, it is an Essex Corporation facility, this abandoned hospital where they're being held by Dr. Reyes. So in that context, I don't know, this movie would take place on the timeline of Logan. It'd probably be like I don't know, the early 2020s, maybe slightly earlier. But yeah, it would take place subsequent to any contemporary X-Men film. So it's kind of on the timeline, on the way to the Logan timeline, instead of the Days of Future Past timeline of the future, like 2025, when the Sentinels have like killed almost all the mutants, or 2023, 2025. I forget what year that took place in. So that's kind of interesting, because Logan says in the movie Logan, he says, Charles, there have been no new mutants born in 25 years. So that would mean 2004 would be the last roughly time that a mutant, a natural born mutant was born. And stuff that Dr. Xander Rice says to Logan kind of confirms this, that they managed to eliminate natural born mutancy. And so 2004, so you're looking at some characters in this movie who are like between 15 and 20 years old, roughly. And so yeah, this would probably take place around 2020, our year, even though it's shot in 2017. But yeah, it would take place in 2020, on the Logan timeline. So like 9 years before Logan, which is several years before Professor Xavier loses control of his powers and accidentally kills most of the X-Men, which that's referred to in Logan. And it's what puts Logan and Charles on the run in that movie with Caliban. So yeah, I really enjoy this film. Let me talk a little bit more about the characters, and then I can wrap up and talk about a few related notes. Um, Alice Braga, I mentioned as Dr. Cecilia Reyes. She's really good in this movie. She's very, very poised and very calm and very, just carefully pronounces every word. And, she just has this kind of veneer. And she does become a little more frantic as the movie goes on with good reason. And she does become more of a menace, a threat to these children than any kind of like mentor. She's good, but then of the New Mutants themselves, the five main characters, I mentioned Henry Zaga, who plays Roberto da Costa, and the fact they made him more light skinned, but his personality and his background are right from the comic books. Now, the other four are spot on cast. Charlie Heaton from Stranger Things, the older brother, is in that is Sam Guthrie, and he's from Kentucky. He has a very southern accent. And I thought, wow, this guy is really pouring on this big southern accent. And then I watched the bonus features on here, and I find out that Charlie Heaton isn't even American himself, that he has a strong British accent. And so the plain American accent that he had in Stranger Things was also acting. So I'm like, man, this guy's good, and it trips me out how many of these actors now are like British or Australian or from New Zealand and have the strong accents and then can do these perfect American accents. Like, of course, Hugh Jackman, obviously, but Charlie Cox as Daredevil, Tom Holland as Peter Parker, Spider-Man. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, I don't know. If I had an accent like that, could I do an American accent? Like, could I talk like this? I guess I could, but this doesn't seem foreign to me because that's what I grew up with. So it's interesting. It puts you in the position of these other people from other countries and how they are, changing in their acting. They're changing themselves to be more American. We're used to it kind of being the other way around. The Americans, are pretending to be something else. So the next character would be Rain Sinclair. She can turn into a wolf, and I think they do really well with her powers. I mean, there's only one real body transformation scene, and it's pretty fast. It's not, it's not American Werewolf in London / The Howling slow mo, and I'm not saying that should be or shouldn't be. I love those movies and I love those changing sequences, but yeah, it wouldn't have made sense in this movie. But in a way, it's a little too fast because you think, well, if Logan's hands hurt when his claws come out, I would think that it'd be more painful and slightly more prolonged, changing your whole body from a human into a wolf. And that's kind of the impression you get from classic modern werewolf movies. But I didn't get that in this. It was almost too fast, and the way she talks about the change in another scene seems like it's almost instantaneous, but she can change into stages between a full wolf, a four-legged creature, which they show her as in two scenes, and herself, and then so in between there's various states where she's part wolfy, and that's true to the comic book too. And her character is true to the comic book. The performance by Maisie Williams is just fantastic. I mean, she's absolutely that character. Um, and then we have Ileana Rasputin, probably the most kind of flashy character, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, who was in The Witch, of course, and also Split and Glass by M. Night Shyamalan. Oops, I can't say his name. Um, yes, she's a very good actress. I mean, I like her. She's in everything now. I mean, she's done a lot of television, and she's already done several films, and she's got a bunch of projects coming up. Some with Robert Eggers, who she did with The Witch with. Two projects with him coming up. One which sounds really cool, called The Northman, which is a Viking horror movie. So I don't know if it's like Valhalla Rising, only as Eggers would do it instead of Refn, but I'm kind of looking forward to it. Has Willem Dafoe, so say no more. Um, but anyway, she's really good as Ileana is a very unpleasant character. She's kind of like the mean girl character. She picks on everybody else and makes fun of them. She's seemingly the oldest character, age wise. So she might be maybe 19, I'm just guessing, 18, 19 ish. Uh, I think Anya was, when she shot this, I think she was about 21. So, not far off. Um, so yeah, and her powers and her persona are very close to the comic books also. Um, she has the armor sword that changes. Her arm changes into an armored arm with a sword that kind of grows out of it, this magic sword. And she can teleport in and out of limbo, which is where she learned magic. That's her mutant power, basically, is she teleporting in and out of limbo. And she has a dragon puppet named Lockheed, and you know, uh, longtime readers of the comic books will know that Lockheed was Kitty Pryde's little pet dragon that she got on some adventure, which I always personally thought was just kind of a bit much. But um, the way they've translated Lockheed is much better with him as her familiar. He's really a puppet that she had since she was a kid, and when she goes into limbo and brings out that power back with her, uh, he comes to life as a real small dragon and can help her fight. So it's like, yeah, um, Lockheed with magic. That's her character's name in the comics. Magik. Um, it works much better than with Kitty Pryde. So another way in which some of the movies have improved on elements of the comic, which I think they have in a lot of ways, while still being true to the themes and the basic characterizations. This one is really spot on. I mean, the last actor I'm going to talk about, last actor in the movie, really is Blue Hunt, and she plays Danielle Moonstar, who's a Native American girl, and she has in the comic book she's sometimes known as Mirage. She has the power to kind of show you your greatest fear. But it takes the whole movie until you realize that she's using her powers on all the other characters, and that's where the whole fear terror thing is coming from. Her mind is conjuring this supernatural terror and these horrible memories in all the other characters because almost all the characters, uh, almost all, maybe all, uh, have killed people when their mutant powers first were realized. Sam killed his dad and some people in the cave in the mine, and Roberto, you know, he burned his girlfriend to death right when they're about to have sex, and um, Eliana killed a bunch of people who attacked her. She said she killed 18 men, and you know, who else is there? I'm forgetting a character. Um, well, Danielle, Rain didn't really necessarily kill somebody, but well, I don't know. They kind of hint that maybe yes, she did kill Reverend Craig. Um, And then Danny, her power is kind of what summoned the demon bear to her reservation. So she basically was responsible for the death of her father and the people in her reservation as well. So yeah, actually, I have the movie on right now, and there's a couple of scenes flashing by, and yes, Rain did kill Reverend Craig. So all of them killed people when their powers first manifested. So that's cool. That gives it an edge too, that they're all killers because that's a device they used in season 1 of Titans. It's like whether they meant to or not, the 4 primary characters have all killed people with their powers and have to kind of live with that, you know. Um, but that's refreshing, when you stack it up to the characters that have the vows never to kill or whatever. We're shown that death is part of the continuum, and uh, like Wolverine says in Logan, the movie. Um, in real life, people die, when he's holding up the comic book of X-Men and slamming on it. Um, so yeah, that's the movie. It's like a one set. Other than the flashbacks, well, the beginning sequence takes place on the reservation, but it happens really fast. So other than flashbacks that come out through these characters' fears, the whole thing takes place in this hospital. So this movie could be, they saved a lot of money and got a lot of great production values, and they could put all that money toward the special effects, which when they do start really kicking in hardcore in the last act are really wonderful. I mean, of course, Magic, Ileana, her whole thing is just fantastic, and she battles the demon bear. They all battle the demon bear, but I really like the way they translated all their powers. I already talked about Rain's transformation, but Roberto, when he kind of flames into the sunspot persona, he looks really cool, and he's kind of like a more gnarly Human Torch kind of looking. And then Sam, when he uses his cannonball powers, is cool because he starts to kind of vibrate, and kind of as his arms and everything, and he kind of blasts off like a rocket. So none too subtle puberty hitting kind of metaphor there, but that's the thing. The comic books. That's why it's so true to the comic books because that's what Claremont was dealing with. That's what made it different and to me better than his X-Men work by far. Was you were dealing with these personalities and they were all very fully realized. Sam was like kind of a stuttering, kind of backwoods guy, and he always felt kind of a lot of guilt and responsibility, and that's the way he is in the film. And Danny was always kind of the angst-ridden teen girl, and of course they tell this movie from her point of view. She's kind of like the audience surrogate, the way Wolverine and to a lesser extent Rogue were in the first X-Men movie. It's the end that we get into this world through is through her eyes. Um, Ileana is a little more bitchy than I remember her being in the comic books, but yeah, definitely has that darkness that can come up at any time. And Sienkiewicz even comments on that in one of the interviews about how much he loved to draw that and that persona, because she's like the sweet blonde haired girl, and then she's also this you know really cruel witch. Um, and then Roberto, yeah, he's spoiled and he's smart ass. That's pretty much like the comics. And Rain was sweet and innocent and Christian and perfect. They got her perfect. I'm not that familiar with Maisie Williams other than this movie. I'm not familiar with her. Uh, Seeing her, I mean, I've read a good bit about her, and I understand she was a child actress who pretty much grew up on Game of Thrones, but that's a show that I am probably the only human um, alive that's never seen any episodes of Game of Thrones. And depending on how you look at things, that's either really great or really terrible or relevant. So I'll let you decide what that means to you, that my status on that. Um, so Yeah, I love this movie. I think it's great. I've seen it 3 times now. It's playing in the background, so this will be the fourth. Um, I I think it's cool. I think it's a lower key kind of departure. It's different and it's really faithful to the comics more than a lot of the mainline X-Men movies were. Um, it's more faithful to the comics than Legion, which is also based on the same comic book. Um, and Which I love Legion, but it's just the actor playing Legion is a bit too old to be Legion, and there's confusion over the timeline with Charles Xavier, and you know, it's kind of a it's kind of a Lynchian interpretation um, of that character from the New Mutants Legion, David Haller, rather than a strict adaptation. But what's cool about Legion is that the way it realizes its mutant ideas about mutants and things remind me a lot of Olaf Stapleton, who wrote Odd John, which was kind of like the first novel that really dealt with mutants, science fiction novel. It came out in 1933, I believe. And there were several on the road to X-Men, such as Children of the Atom by Willem Shera, and then some by A. Van Vogt, like Slan, and one or two others I'm probably forgetting that came before the X-Men comic book. They were all antecedents of the X-Men, and most of them were originally published in pulp magazines, and it's like Brody Bruce would say, I'd bet dollars to donuts that Stan Lee, his idol, read those pulps, and that's where he got the term Homo superior, the term Children of the Atom. We could go on and on. Chris Claremont kind of based an issue of X-Men where Xavier fights the Shadow King for the first time, who is a villain in the Legion series. Um, he based that sequence on a sequence where John Wainwright meets the mutant Adlan through psionic time travel. Uh, so it's very interesting. There's lots of parallels throughout all this stuff. And so where are we with all this? Well, it's the end of an era, 20 years solid. Summer of 2000 to summer of 2020. So I saw X-Men in the theater the opening night. It was, if I'm correct, it was July 14th of 2000 here. Um, and then I first saw this movie. We're talking about mid-November of 2020. It played briefly in the South, but nowhere near where I live, and in no major towns or cities in August. So, again, summer in August 2000, I was going back to the movie theater to rewatch X-Men 2 or 3 times. Um, so it's an excellent bookend, and I think it's one of those movies that it's going to be like, you know, people want to shame you for liking it, and I just think that's absurd. I mean, I really do think it's absurd. You know, like tell me why this movie is no good. I mean, don't tell me, oh, it's cheesy, it's slow, it's derivative of John Hughes and Stephen King. It's like, it's not this, it's not that, you know, but they can't say it's not faithful to the comic books. They can't say it doesn't look good, and they can't say the acting's not good, and the photography, the special effects. I mean, they could say, well, the pacing could be a little better. Yeah, maybe. I mean, but it is kind of like a set bound kind of thing, almost not exactly like a play, but it's like a one locale thing, and that's a legitimate thing in low budget films, and even in non low budget films. But it is always a way to save money and get your, like I say, your production values out of something. But Night of the Living Dead takes place in that almost completely in that damn cabin, and Evil Dead takes place almost completely in a cabin. So I mean, Assault on Precinct 13, you're in a police station the whole time. Pontypool, you're in a radio station the whole time. So, I mean, it's pretty time honored tradition in horror movies to have this kind of setting. The biggest changes they made in the movie were the big twist is that it is not Xavier that they're training them to be part of X Men with. It is the Essex Corporation, and um, they are employing Reyes to train them to be killers. And so essentially, when she talks about her benefactor, who she refers to as a male, they never say who exactly it is because there in the movies there has not yet been a Nathaniel Essex character in and of himself. There's just the Essex Corporation. You haven't seen a character called Nathaniel Essex, as there was a Mister Sinister, the alter ego in the comic books of Nathaniel Essex. Um, so my guess is it's Xander Rice, who was in charge of the program in Logan and had been in charge of it for a number of years. And his father worked on Weapon X. Well, in the movie continuity, I guess early 1980s, is when it took place. Um, so Xander's his son, and that's the he I believe they're talking about. So that's something that's in between the lines. It's an Easter egg, but I mean it's one of those obvious things. And of course, fanboys will argue and be like, no, that's not really what they meant. And I mean, you could have the script writer come down and talk to them, and they still wouldn't buy it. That's how these things get. Um, but um, I like the extras. I like the time spent with Bill Sienkiewicz. I like the fact Sienkiewicz endorsed this movie. I like the screenwriters. I like the one guy who co-writes it and directs it, Josh Boone. He used to own a comic book store in the '80s. Um, he seems like a cool guy. He seems maybe a few years older than me, and he just he seems like a really groovy dude. And he really captured these characters. He really loves these characters, and he really loved that particular run on these characters. So you got to give major props. Uh, for once, you can give real major props to Chris Claremont for something that they adapted of his that they didn't have to improve upon. They didn't have to rethink or anything. They didn't have to filter it through another lens. The material was right there, and it was right there, but it was there before Sienkiewicz partnered with him. Bob McLeod co-created the book, but um, it was brought to the fore. So as much as it seems like in the beginning I'm knocking Claremont, I've got to say, this is his magic moment. I hope he was in the theater or private screenings or however they saw this with COVID going on. And I hope he teared up, and like John Romita said, he teared up when Wolverine popped his claws. And I tear up on those resonant moments myself, that are so much like ones from my childhood. Um, so I want to see some footage of Claremont, just bawling his eyes out, in happiness, because Sienkiewicz loves this thing. I've met Bill Sienkiewicz a number of times. Bill's a cool guy, and I haven't talked to him or seen him in a few years. It was cool seeing him in these interviews, and he's the artist that made the biggest impression on me um, as a young person. I mean, the single artist of any kind, but definitely comic book artist, but just artist period, visual artist, that kind of pushed me over the edge and was like, wow, look at what can be done here. I mean, this is, it resonated with me, and that's why I loved, one of the many reasons, again, I loved that comic book and why I love this movie. So anyway, it's not the best X-Men movie. I'm not going to say it is, but it's definitely not the worst X-Men movie. So anyway, I posted about it on Facebook, and people are trying, to be polite since it's my page, but I can tell there's, that twinge of controversy, like, well, I really didn't like it, but I shouldn't go off on it. Or, well, here's what I think is the worst X-Men movie. And then I'm thinking, well, I kind of like that one, but okay. Um, in my opinion, as long as Apocalypse exists, there can't be a worst X-Men movie. That's my final word on it. I have spoken. So anyway, take care, and I'll see you in the next episode. Oh, here comes the notification. Take care. It's good talking, and watch New Mutants. Let me know what you think.